I'm your host, Dr. Catherine Clinton, and I am thrilled to be here with my friend and colleague, Carrie Bennett. Carrie Bennett has a BS in biology and a master's degree in clinical nutrition with multiple certifications. Carrie has sought out the root cause in her own failing health and ultimately found circadian and quantum biology. Carrie currently sees clients in her private online practice and teaches courses in applied quantum biology as a faculty member at the Quantum Biology Collective and as an instructor at Kalamazoo College via her online platform. So thank you so much, Carrie, for taking time to talk with us today.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm so excited to be here. This is just going to be so much fun.
I absolutely enjoy to the utmost every time we talk and am really excited to just dive into this. So
Let's do
for
it.
those, yes, absolutely. Let's start with talking about mitochondria and redox and just we'll just go from there.
Sure, sure. So, if we think about the body needing energy, right? We've heard that. Oh, you need energy. That's why you eat food. It gives you energy. It's energy. Well, what really is that? Like, how are we getting energy? And one way that I think is outdated that we can go into why of looking at that is that we eat food, it becomes electrons, and those electrons go to the mitochondria. And these mitochondria are almost like little power plants inside of our cells, and they used to have their own bacterial origin, right? And so billions of years ago, they used to be their own species, potentially a bacteria that then got engulfed, and ultimately now they're inside of us. And so back in the day, they were really probably really darn good in some harsh worldly conditions at gathering electrons and oxygen and making their own energy. And so now they're doing that for us, which is so cool. And so the theory goes, we've got thousands, if not millions of them inside of every cell. And they kind of partition their numbers based on how much energy a given tissue needs. And they take electrons. And what we always hear, Catherine, and I know that this is kind of a bit of a pet peeve of maybe yours or mine, but we always hear they take the electrons and the electrons go down the electron transport chain and they make ATP. And ATP is the energy currency of the body. So that's why we eat food. It becomes ATP. And while that's true, right, I'm not denying that that's a thing. Electrons from food can ultimately drive ATP synthesis. I think if we don't look at it from a slightly different perspective, we're missing out on all of the other things the mitochondria make in the electron transport chain, and also the other roles that they play for us inside of our cells, as an antenna for frequencies, as a communicator via biophotons. So that's kind of where I want to go, right? Let's talk beyond that ATP, because I think that, yeah, that does something, but that's nowhere near the most important thing that mitochondria do for us.
I couldn't agree with you more, and that's why I love talking with you right now. Absolutely, and even ATP, right?
Yeah.
ATP is thought of as just the currency, but now we're finding that ATP and structured water are actually working together to create those protein configurations and shape, which leads to function, as we know. So absolutely, absolutely. So let's dive into this and talk about those electrons and where else we might be getting them and what that looks like as far as redox and oxidation and that
Mhm.
polarity that we have within us.
Yeah, sure. So, yes, we can get electrons from food. We can get electrons when we break down body fat, right? That can ultimately becomes electrons. And then our environment, our outside world is rich in electrons. I would estimate that only 25 to 35% of electrons come from food, right? We're meant to get them in so many other ways.
Mhm.
So the coolest part about our body is that we actually can conduct electrons, right? We can pull electrons into us. And it just so happens that the surface of the earth is like an infinite supply of these electrons, from lightning strikes, creating these electron discharges. And so the electrons are always there. So anytime I touch bare skin to the surface of the earth, I'm soaking in electrons. And I've got kind of like reservoirs for these electrons all throughout my body. Some of them go to the mitochondria and help that electron transport chain. Some of them go to the extracellular matrix, right? And they're like this reservoir of almost like inflammatory preparedness and negative charge there, right? That's an important thing. Some of them are stored in the actual cell membrane to create a membrane potential. And also, I think an extra supply of electrons if it's needed for injury repair. It goes to the exclusion zone water, right? It can flow through the exclusion zone water, that structured water in us. We can get electrons via piezoelectricity and movement. So the body is basically needs to be thought of as like this depot of electrons. And when we frame it that way, it's like, oh, my body needs electrons. My body needs basically more electrons than I lose. My cells need to have a negative charge. Absolutely, that's true. And so that makes my lifestyle options, it's easier to say, oh, so it really means it's important for me to touch bare skin to the earth frequently. It's important for me to move my body to generate this electricity current, this electron flow through my connective tissue. Oh, it's important for me to get sunlight on my skin because that will generate a plasma of electrons in my body and it helps build that structured water. So it's really made me reframe this idea of exercise and diet, right? As opposed to, no, I'm gathering electrons.
That's beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And we often think of things so one-sided, right? And there's this dance really happening between our electrons and our protons, right? Can we
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit about, I mean, I really like to think of it as like a yin-yang
Mm-hmm.
type of relationship. They're dependent on each other, and there's value in both of them, even though we often focus on the electron piece because we're so deficient in modern society and stuff. But can we talk a little bit about the dance between the electrons and the protons and yeah, let's start there.
Yeah. I mean, I think we can highlight a couple of key ways, right? With that, is that there is a really strong connection between the electrons and the protons in the mitochondria, right? In the mitochondria themselves. So again, we talk about the electron transport chain, but no one ever talks about this proton gradient that helps to drive the ATPase, that step 5, that synthesis. They're equally important. If something gums up or jams up that spinning motor of the ATPase, you're going to diminish electron flow through the rest of the electron transport chain. So like something like deuterium, that's where that can come into play. And so that's really important to think of there. It's important to recognize that anywhere in our body that we make this exclusion zone water that has a negative charge, to structure itself, it kicks out a proton. And there's a proton concentration that I love that it's now being called the proton zone or a proton wire right outside. And that those protons can actually almost penetrate into the lattice of the exclusion zone to kind of to diminish it in key ways, right? Like there's always this buildup and diminishment and buildup, and it's like this phase change, if you want to call it that way. And that's how that's how proteins work. That's how the body works. It's like you have a protein in a certain configuration with this exclusion zone water and ATP holding it in the exact right configuration, and then it moves or it shifts,
Yeah.
it bends, it twists a different way. And that's where the protons can help to create a phase change or a shift in the water density so it can do its thing. And then the ATP helps to line that proton or that protein back up, and the exclusion zone water, that negative charge builds back up, and then it bends again. And so we're always at this interplay between electrons and negative charge and protons. And it just so happens that we do need a net negative charge inside of our cells. Our bodies need this net negative charge. And again, not woo or controversial, right? That's something that you could open up pretty much any biology or medical textbook and see. Yes, that's a thing. But where I think we differ in that is the idea of where that negative charge comes from, as opposed to these ion channels and things like that. And also, it's important to acknowledge that our modern lifestyle really depletes us of that negative charge. So it's easy to understand potentially how we hear now about, oh, you're acidic, right? You have too many protons. This tissue is acidic, or cancer likes acidic. In my opinion, it's just because we're not maintaining our negative charge in key ways, allowing the protons to dominate. But it's not good, it's not bad. They work definitely in tandem, as you're suggesting.
Absolutely. I love that you just said that because um, a lot of space in the quantum biology community talking about that negative charge and that net negative charge, which is absolutely something we need, but then viewing the protons as this, darkness or this
A
bad
bad
force,
guy.
right? And just, I mean, looking at the mitochondria, we need that proton gradient in the inner membrane space to make that ATP. We need that constant dance between both. And I think it's really beautiful when we start to bring in that bigger holistic picture, because when we're talking about mitochondria being an antenna or a communicator or a messenger or sort of like that sixth sense, we're talking about the ability of the body to use these quantum particles as messages, right?
hmm Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because absolutely. So those if we just take a look and simplify it for people, if you looked at one mitochondrion, the entire thing from the outside to the inside to the membranes to in between the electron transport proteins, all of that has that exclusion zone water, and there's also then that proton wire. So basically we have to view the body, and then that's everywhere in the body. It's always like that, no matter if you're looking at just one mitochondrion or an entire cell or a tissue. So basically, instead of viewing the body from its parts, like its organelles, even the mitochondria or the nucleus or cells, I like to look at it as we're just a bunch of channels, basically, of electrons, protons, and then photons. Right? Photons can go through that exclusion zone as well, and so that's how the body can communicate instantaneously, because those protons can jump conduct, right? Which is just basically saying they can go anywhere as fast as they want, faster than the speed of light. The same thing with the photon signaling that happens like this. And so if we start to view the body as just basically trying to funnel photons and protons and electrons in key ways, you can start to understand the speed with which the body operates, the scale at which the body operates, and then how to influence that and understand, well, maybe if I've destroyed my exclusion zone water, or I have a change in the ability to make that proton zone in this given area, that's perhaps where I've lost quantum information. And could that possibly be a driver of disease?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And for those listening that are a little more show me your reference, there's a wonderful study that came out in 2021 showing that in complex one of the mitochondria, that structured water wire allows for those protons to travel through the complex, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that protein complex within the mitochondrial membrane is what I'm talking about. So there's ample evidence. This has gone from, hypothesis to something we can clearly see in the research. And that's just one example, right?
Just it's just one example, and but like when you sit down and think about it, it just makes so much more sense, because the way I know, the way you learned it traditionally and the way I learned it traditionally was, oh, there's these biochemical loops, and look, a hydrogen is lost here and then it's moved here, and then an electron's lost here and then it's moved here, and it's like this passing via these biochemical loops, and it just can't explain the speed with which the body operates. So it's almost like we know that this is happening. And so let's retroactively kind of see what chemicals could be involved. And so I'm not saying that that's not a thing, but you're right. When all of a sudden, when there's tons of evidence and research slapping you in the face to show that these proton wires exist, they're the ones that have to flow super fast to maintain that gradient. Same thing in the lysosomes, right, where there's another huge rich proton gradient. So like it's there, and once you understand it from this quantum level, you're like, oh, biochemistry is interesting and molecular biology is interesting, but really I need to understand the body, how it works like this.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Everything that we look at when we zoom out is really these cycles, right? It's recycling energy, it's recycling matter. And we love to reduce it down to like, what's it doing for me personally as a human? But when we back out and we zoom out, we see it's all of these spirals. I mean, even when we look at the configuration of these proteins, they're
Mm-hmm.
these spiral, yeah, absolutely, amino acid complexes, they're so brilliantly illustrating how our ecosystems work. And that balance between the two is really where we get that health that we're all looking for.
Yeah, I love it. And I love that you brought up that helical or the spiraling, because everything in the body is in a spiral structure. Like you said, the collagen, the proteins that are embedded in the membrane, the DNA, like there's a reason why the helix and the spiral is a repeating pattern. There's also a reason why the phi spiral, why you see the same pattern in nature with the phi spiral. There's a reason why photons, when they mapped the path of the photon, it was spiraling, right? There's a spiral grain to things. And so nature has basically harnessed that spiral as a way to move energy. Vortexes move energy, concentrate it, move it and concentrate it. It's so fascinating to recognize that we're just what we're talking about at that small tiny scale. You could see also looking at the drain of your bathtub as the water empties, or you could see in a tornado, or you could see from up above how a hurricane circles, or the galaxies. The spiraling and the circling is how things happen. And the coolest part about it inside of the body with these proteins is that these proteins are surrounded by that exclusion zone water, right? And so they have this spiraling path for the electrons to flow. They've got this spiraling path where the protons can flow. And they also have this in a lot of key areas. They actually have what's called a water nanotubes that form, right? And so it's just like open channels of water to conduct itself everywhere. So it's so cool. And to think about it, the spiral has to matter, because these moving charged particles are generating a magnetic field, and this magnetic field is felt by all areas of the body and beyond. So it's so cool to think about how everything is put together when you look at it from this perspective. And it's not by chance. None of this is by chance. All of this stuff is really designed a key way, or has been created in a key way in order to be able to optimize that quantum communication.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I love when you talk about like classical physics or classical biology, and how quantum biology doesn't negate that. It just lays out the blueprint for how those things are being powered. Because
Yes.
what we see happening in the world of matter that we can see, right? I throw a ball and it hits a wall and bounces back. Those things can be explained by quantum phenomenon. And when we get to that level of understanding, the interconnectedness between our own cells is absolutely mind blowing. And then it extends out, right? And this communication network that we're in extends around to the world around us. And it is absolutely phenomenal. And I'm hoping, Carrie, we can kind of go out on a little exploration of what that means, why we might have that capacity as humans to collect information from our environment, from the photons and
Mm,
phonons and frequency information, and what that says really about consciousness. I mean, I know
mhm.
that Penrose and his microtubules of, as sort of antennas for the conveyance of consciousness.
Uh-huh.
Um,
And I'm not going to argue with Penrose. I think he's brilliant, but people do forget the water. They
yeah,
forget the water, right? We want to think it's a thing. We want to think consciousness resides in an organ or in a protein structure.
right.
And I think it resides in the water.
Oh, absolutely. Tell us more, Carrie.
Oh, okay. So I mean, and I'm not necessarily the world expert on this, but I've loved following this ever since I found Masaru Emoto's work.
Mhm.
And he's the one who had the hidden messages in water that talked about, oh, you could speak loving words to water, and if you looked at a frozen structure of that water, it would create these beautiful coherent six-sided snowflakes, versus if you were to speak negatively to the water. I hate you, you're ugly, whatever it was. And then this water wouldn't arrange itself at all. And so, knowing what we know about water in the body, it wants to be ordered and structured. And its ability to order itself and structure itself is what allows us to have that negative charge. But it also allows that water to form a liquid crystal. And in physics, we know that liquid crystals interact with frequency, right? They can trap and capture frequency. Again, classical physics, not woo. We just never thought it was happening inside of the human body. And now that we know, not only is the water a liquid crystal, but we've got really ordered arrays of proteins too that act as liquid crystals, or membrane species like the phospholipids that act as liquid crystals. Our whole body is one gigantic liquid crystal. And so, yes, there's protein arrays, but at the smaller scale, it's the water. And so I'm a firm believer that water is an antenna for frequency information. We need a way to interact with all that's going on in our environment without observing it. Because by observing it with our senses, we change it, right? That's the observer effect. We change the behavior of that particle information, or we collapse a wave into a particle, basically. And so we have to be able to interact with the waves. So that's why, and people are like, wait, that's just so flippant, esoteric, and weird. But I don't think it's weird when you say, well, if I were to give you a radio right now, and I were to ask you to turn it on, you could tune it and you could find 50 different songs or 50 different channels bringing information that's invisible to you to your radio device. And so the same thing is happening in our bodies. We are literally bathing. All we can interact with physically around us is less than 1% of the waves of information that are around us. And so we have to have a way to understand what that information is in our environment, like I said, without consciously perceiving it, in order to adapt to it. To understand, is there a threat or am I in peace? Is there going to be a change in seasons? Is there going to be a change in temperature? Is there going to be a change? Like, there's so many different things that my body is constantly perceiving, all to make sure that I survive and survive and thrive as best as possible. And so it's the water in my body that does that. And then that water can then store information. It's not, again, there are patents out there and there's articles out there written on quantum-based computers that are solely made out of water, because water can configure itself in way more configurations than the binary 1-0. And so you actually have 5 times at least the amount of storage capacities based on how the oxygen, what charge the oxygen holds. So it's so fascinating when you recognize that our body is like this insane antenna for all of the frequency information in my environment, in the cosmos, and it can store all of that information inside of that same water network. So I don't know. That's all I have to say about that.
Mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing, isn't it? It's absolutely mind-blowing. And it really speaks to the interconnectedness of it all. And I'd love for us to kind of walk our viewers through what that looks like, right? So, like you said, the radio frequency information that's invisible to us, a lot of us, most of us, are familiar with liquid crystal technology in our screens and our TVs, smartphones, and that ability to pick up on information is the first step of understanding, right? And then the next obstacle of understanding is, how is that propagated throughout the body, right? So coherence of proteins being able to communicate together, attract each other via frequency. Can we kind of walk through this conversation so that people kind of really have a visual that it's not just
it's
that
not like
it's
hormone docking, or like
right.
receptor docking and stuff. Yeah.
Right. It's not that random collision model that, like you said, we know doesn't work because of the efficiency and the speed at which our body works. So how is, as one of my favorite subjects, how is that coherence of the body adding to that communication? What's this look like? Let's walk through this for people.
Yeah. Okay. This is great. Right. So I think one of the best ways to start out with that is this idea of the tuning fork, and to recognize that, like, if I have one tuning fork tuned to, a certain note, like one particular note, and I strike it, And if there's in my room, if there's another tuning fork tuned to that exact same note, it's going to start vibrating too, right? It's going to
Mhm.
also start sounding,
Yeah.
which is right. So that this signal, this tuning fork sent that tuning fork a signal without ever touching. And so there was a frequency, a vibration that was sent and caused this one to resonate. However, I could have two tuning forks of the same shape, but oops, I dropped this one and now it's broken a little bit, chipped off a little bit. And if I were to strike it, it resonated, the other tuning forks would not pick up that same frequency anymore because it's a slightly different shape, a slightly different configuration, and so that way that means it vibrates just a little bit differently to the extent where this tuning fork and that tuning fork can't sense it anymore. So in essence, the body is a bunch of molecules and proteins that need a specific shape. And that shape is determined, as we said, by that exclusion zone water, the ability of that water to hold these proteins and molecules in really important conformations so that stuff can get done. And so I'm a firm believer that it's not about, let's say we hear, oh, in the morning, cortisol is elevated, right? And so we're told that it's this whole hormonal axis. We got to release this. And then we have to elevate tons of blood cortisol for an effect to happen. I think elevated blood cortisol in the morning is an artifact of the fact that there was a resonance of light in my environment that caused some downstream effects. The cortisol that was already in my body maybe became more activated, and that was the only signal that was needed, that resonance effect, in order for the cortisol in my body to become active, and then the receptors to have a matching resonance to it, to understand that it's not about how elevated my blood cortisol gets. It's about, are my receptors, and am I getting the signal right? Am I getting the right vibration? And are my receptors able to pick up that information to then pass on more information? And so goes the whole downstream effect from that.
It's absolutely so precise and beautiful the way it works. One of the examples that I really like to use is that really traumatic or significantly stressful events actually disrupt our circadian rhythm, right? That our circadian rhythm is set by that vibratory information of sunlight, right, through our retina, passing through our central clock to all the peripheral clocks. And an event that makes us feel unsafe, that takes us out of context, can really disrupt that whole system. And it's this really finely tuned system of like, are you where you're supposed to be in this huge ecosystem of interaction? And if not, we need to start working to get you back there, so to speak.
That's beautifully put. The one thing I tell people is there's nothing more stressful than a body that doesn't know where it is in time and space. And
Mhm.
the only way it knows where it is in time and space, like you said, is that vibratory information, from the photons of light that are available to the magnetic fields that we're feeling in our environment. I mean, so we're just basically needing to pick up that information at all times. And we have that water network to disseminate these vibrations. Picture that water is a little bit different configuration, right? It's a little bit, I like to liken it more like a gel, so picture what happens when you strike jello, right? Jello vibrates. So it's easy to see how we can organize the water to create a different structure that we can vibrate then, and that vibration contains information, and that we can entrain that our bodies to the information that we've been meant to be entrained to
Mhm.
for millennia, which is all the information that we get from nature. And so that's why being inside and in a stressful environment, that's why it's like, that's adding insult to injury, because of the fact that not only are we perceiving like this mental stress, but also right now, I mean, even me being like, knowing what I know, my body doesn't really know where it is in time and space, right? I'm not in a natural environment. Now I know enough to take frequent breaks outside to ground and get the signals that my body needs, but it's understandable it's easy to recognize now how we're kind of where we're at as in a state of health as a society, because we're under tons of mental stress, and it's this other stress that we haven't even, that no one even really knows about the vibrations and the frequencies that are supposed to give us key information about where our body is and what it should be doing.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's really where I got my hooks in with quantum biology is with looking at trauma and looking at how nutrition and circadian rhythm and how it all has this underlying quantum biological action and premise foundation. And really that coherence that we're talking about with the proteins really speaks to our ability to access information from the environment around us. And I love what you're saying about the tuning forks because it allows for our body to do so many different reactions, right? Just like you were saying, that one tuning fork creates a tune that is then picked up and another one resonates at that. And then that frequency can actually change the
Mm-hmm.
configuration and then it propagates again. Like one tuning fork in the body, one protein can change into multiple different configurations giving and emitting multiple different messages and frequencies and information pieces. It's just really infinite the amount of biological process that can happen on this quantum biological level.
Yeah, absolutely. You would appreciate this because one of my favorite quotes from May Wan Ho is picture the cells, like what's happening inside of the cells. Picture like this dark, drunken frat house. You're not necessarily going to bump into like people. You're not, if you had to find someone, you're not necessarily going to be able to wander through this frat house and find this person efficiently. But if you had a horn that that person knew was your signal to please come find me, woo, I'm here, I'm here. And that's exactly what's happening inside of the body. Like the signals are coordinated and synced up in such a coherent way. So it's really cool.
It is really cool. It is really cool. I love May Wan Ho's work. The way she brings in engineering, like as a doctor, that wasn't my background at all. So it was really wonderful to have her books that really kind of talk about the um, quantum dynamics behind it. Can we talk a little bit about May Wan Ho and her work and her,
Sure.
yeah,
Oh,
she's,
well, she's the one who really got me to understand that the body was this beautiful liquid crystalline organism, right? And so
yeah,
her and Dr. Pollack, and that it was the water that did it. But what I really also love about her work is that we're she talks a lot about, how do we add order, basically, how are we adding order
yeah.
to the body, right? How are we giving the body neg entropy, and the body is designed to be ordered. It wants to be ordered. It wants to order itself. And
Mhm.
so that's where I love this idea of, instead of my body just trying to work against me and deteriorate, at every given moment, that it's actually trying to work for me. It's trying to maintain structure. It's trying to maintain form, and with certain key inputs that are ordered and do provide the right information, I can facilitate that. I can help it. So that's where light comes into play. Light's got this order and this information. So that's a
Mhm.
beautiful thing, right? That's where, adding in electrons into the system, that's order, that's information, that's energy. And so the body is continually trying to be a really quantum coherent being, and I think it's trying to work for us, as opposed to this concept of, oh, my body's failing me. It's like, no, wait a second. What environment am I putting my body in that's allowing it to fail for me? Because the body really wants to work for us.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I work a lot with autoimmune patients, and as a person who has multiple autoimmune conditions, that's exactly what I see is autoimmunity is the body's reaction to the environment it's in. And if you can change that, then the symptoms and the definition of what that looks like completely change. So I love that you brought that up. Couldn't agree more. Now, I know that you're a busy woman, and so I just want to go through one last topic before I
Yeah,
let you
sure.
go.
Let's do
I
it.
could
Let's do it.
keep you here forever. But I would love to chat a little bit about the role of food. I know that you were talking a little bit about ATP and how we get energy from non-food sources, right? Can we talk a little bit about how our body is incorporating food on a quantum biological level, what that really looks like.
Yeah, I actually like this topic more and more because it's not like you have to be vegan, you have to be keto, you have to be carnivore, right? It
Mhm.
looks at food from a completely different perspective. So from a quantum perspective, I live in a certain part of the world, and my body is receiving inputs of information from that part of the world. It's showing, if I'm outside right now, it's showing me that it's 2:15 in the afternoon via the blend of the colors of light. It's telling me what time of year it is based on the angle of the light and how much vitamin D I could be making. It's telling me my location based on the magnetism, the changes in the magnetism, my location and the time of day. So I'm continually gathering information about my environment, and food is the same way. There's a reason why a banana tree would not grow naturally in my backyard, right? Where I live in the 42nd latitude, we have this massive period of winter, and in the summer the sun never gets intense enough for long enough to be able to sustain tropical fruits, right? They're called tropical fruits for a reason. Whereas in the tropics, they grow, you can get bananas and pineapples, like, right, they grow in a certain area. So why is that? Well, the plants that are in my environment are tied to the light in my environment. Just like the light that's entering my eyes matters, the light that the plants harness is basically stored in the electrons of that plant or of that animal, right? That's growing in that environment. And when I digest that, I'm releasing light information into my body in the exact same way I would be getting light information if I was outside right now, or how I could be giving my body the wrong light information if I'm staring at my phone screen that's super bright and blue lit at midnight, right? That's the wrong light information. So it's not about plants good, plants bad, meat good, meat bad. It's about, can I make my food another signal of information in my environment? And then, so that's the electrons. And then specifically too, tropical fruits have more deuterium, a different type of proton, right? Or a different type of hydrogen that changes how the ATPase functions, both inside of the mitochondria and in the lysosomes. And so tropical fruits have more. The fruits and vegetables that grow here don't. And so the deuterium content of the food that's available to me locally is optimized to my location to sense key signals and key metabolic functions in my mitochondria to change electron flow, promote autophagy, things like that, in conjunction with the season I'm in. And so we have to start looking at food as information in the exact same way we look at light as information. And we can use that information to optimize our circadian rhythm and optimize our mitochondrial health, because that's basically what tunes into the light carried in that food.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in the quantum biology community, and research, there's a lot of talk about aromatic compounds, right? Aromatic compounds. And we often talk about tryptophan and some of the amino acids
Mm-hmm.
being aromatic compounds, but so much of our food is aromatic compounds, our flavins. I mean, all of our antioxidants, so to speak, are aromatic compounds that are able to interact with light and capture that information, like you're saying. It's just absolutely fascinating. And when you say that we eat the food and that light is then emitted throughout our body, can we talk a little bit about biophotons?
Oh, yeah, sure, sure. I love it. I think it's important for people to recognize that electrons capture light, right? And when an electron that's moving, it captures a photon of light that basically excites that electron into what's called a higher orbital, or it energizes that electron. And the process in the bodies are basically the passing then of this photonic energy throughout the entire system until it's not a usable source or not a highly energetic photon anymore, in which case I think it then goes on to structure the water in our bodies. So we're continually releasing these photons, and inside of the body, they're called biophotons. And so, where are some key places where we release it? Well, the mitochondria, as they pass electrons, naturally, as they're passing electrons, they're going to lose some of that light that's carried on these electrons. And that's a biophoton signal. the right amount actually allows the DNA to change its expression. So it can change, the proteins that are being made in that particular cell, or it can express certain genes based on the time of year, based on all this information we're talking about. And so that's why mitochondrial health matters a ton too, is because we want the appropriate biophoton signaling. Too
Mhm.
much, it's like, you want, like, a couple of, I liken it to, like, that backyard fireworks show where, every once in a while the neighbor goes boom, boom, as opposed to like the grand finale at like a major city park. It's boom, 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 boom. We have a key amount of biophotons that really provide some great signaling. And when you get beyond that, that's where all of a sudden the cell goes, ooh, inflammation, damage, lots of electrons are being lost, lots of light. And then you can create more of a cell danger response or a stress response inside of the cell. So biophotons are signaling molecules, and the mitochondria are key producers of them. They can funnel them and talk to the microtubules. So there's like almost like a consciousness communication happening there too, or a light communication happening with the microtubules inside of the cells. We know that every cell leaks some biophotons.
Mhm.
And the kind of like, now we're learning the colors of the photons, is it ultraviolet, is it red, is it blue, can determine something about what's happening with the function inside the cell. Is it healthy? Is it signaling disease? What's going on with that? So basically, we're using photons of light inside of our body at all times as a means of communication.
That's absolutely fascinating. And the fascial network too, right?
Oh,
There's
yeah.
amazing research out there about how the fascia emits light seasonally, right? Really signaling to our body what season it is, what we need to be doing metabolically, and how to repair. It's absolutely amazing.
It's so cool. It's so
So,
cool.
it is so cool.
That's about all I can say about it. It's so cool.
It is, it is so cool. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to talk with me today.